Today's edition of the DBR Podcast is brought to you by the guys from Byrd Campbell with offices in Florida and Texas, founded by a pair of former Duke roommates. Byrd Campbell means business. Hey, Duke fans, welcome to episode number 97. I can't believe we're on episode number 97. We are going to have episode number 100 just around the corner. This is the 97th episode of the DBR Podcast, the Duke Basketball Report podcast. I am hosting this week, and you should know by now who I am, but I'll introduce myself anyway. If you're a first-timer here, I am Jason Evans, the old guy in the group, the 50-year-old, and I am joined by a pair of younger compadres for every one of these episodes. First in Washington, D.C., Donald Wine, say hello to the masses.
So I guess if we're the three bears, I'm the middle bear, the one that Goldilocks is probably not going to sleep in their bed and eat their porridge and stuff because it's going to be too cold.
So we should now go out to Denver to the little bear who has the porridge that is just the right temperature and the bed that's just the right size. Sam Klein, how you doing, Sam? Little bear.
Listen, I've hung out with Donald Wine a couple times, and I object to being the little bear. I'm not a big guy, but
I'm a big guy.
But Donald is no bigger than I am. So wait. Let's just get a few things straight.
If we go by weight, by how much you weigh,
all
Sam,
right, this is
you are the little bear. You are
right,
the little bear.
Yeah, you might have a bill, but you ain't got two.
That's fair. All right, I will accept this and just know that. And you know what? If that's just the way it's going to be, then I can deal with it. It's fine.
So, folks, it's nice that we're laughing and having a good time because, frankly, what happened to Duke a few days ago is just a little bit depressing. The completely unfounded and ridiculous expectation that Duke might go undefeated went crashing by the wayside as the Blue Devils played their first road ACC game at Boston College, BC, a program that has not been anywhere close to even the middle of the ACC for quite some time. And the young Duke team was shocked, absolutely shocked, 89-84. They lost to BC. There are a million different things that can be said about this game, but I will start by mentioning this. Duke had out-rebounded every single opponent this season, and I've talked in this podcast on numerous occasions. My unified theory of Duke basketball this year is rebounding. We kill teams on the boards. And the first time we lose the rebounding battle was to BC, and it also happens to be our first loss. I think it is not a coincidence that Duke fell in the first game that we were out-rebounded. And I'm going to hand it over to Sam, first of all. Sam, give me your impressions on this game. And let me ask this question to start with. So with 3.5 minutes left in this game, Gary Trent hits a three-pointer to put Duke up 79-75. Were you as sure as I was that once again we were going to see Duke be outplayed all night, but come out on the right end of the scoreboard, or did you think the game was still in doubt?
I thought that Duke was going to win the game from about 10 or 11 minutes left because they were just playing to the same script that they have all year. It didn't occur to me that the rebounding troubles and the defensive troubles were things they weren't going to correct. And I think there were a couple things about this game that were different in the second half than in all those previous games against high quality opponents that Duke eventually overcame. Number one, as you mentioned, the most important thing I think was the rebounding. Boston College had almost every rebounding opportunity. Boston College had at least 3 guys and often 4 who were under the basket making space and getting rebounds. And that's at both ends. We've talked in particular about how Duke is so good at the offensive rebounding, about how Carter and Bagley can go get their misses. They can go get other guys' misses and put them up efficiently. We've even seen Marques Bolden do a little bit of that. And there was not much of that in this game. I think the other thing is that Duke kind of abandoned the inside offensive presence and took a lot of some good but some really bad 3-point shots, most of which didn't fall. They shot a pretty poor percentage from three, and I think we've learned one of the key things we've learned about this team, unlike Duke teams of the past, they are not going to get away with shooting other teams out and making half of their 3-pointers in a game to just send the game away. They're going to have to put the ball inside, and they're going to have to deal with getting 2 points on a possession instead of 3 often, which also leads to the other problem Duke had in this game, which was that they didn't really get to the free throw line. Even when they got the ball inside, Duke wasn't able to draw fouls. Boston College was much more disciplined than I expected them to be, given the lack of size and talent relative to Duke. So Duke didn't make it to the line at all, and couldn't get those free opportunities, and all those things together contributed to them just never being able to pull away. And I thought they were going to win, probably much longer than most people did, because it didn't really get until into the final minute where I was like, I guess they just didn't put all that stuff together in this game like they have in all those other games.
I am so glad you mentioned the free throw shooting. There are several stats that jump out from this game that I was just like,
yeah, sorry,
wow.
I failed to pull them up ahead of time, and now I don't want to make all the clicking sounds required. Can you tell me how many free throws Duke took in this game?
Yes, absolutely. So in this game, Duke attempted 13 free throws. 13, and we made 12 of them. But to me, the stat I was going to say that jumps out. So with this game, looking at statistically, I really dug deep on some. I didn't look at a surface thing like, oh, we had 13 free throw attempts. I'm going to give you an even better stat than that. You ready?
Yeah. Because the free throw shooting, I mentioned it last because I think it's the most out, other than the rebounding. I think that the free throw shooting is actually the most out of character thing for this team because they the ball inside so much, and it's the guards. It's like Duval gets fouled, Allen gets fouled all the time, and then the big guys get fouled all the time because they're going up for rebounds so strong, and other teams just don't have a choice usually but to foul them. So tell me about the free throw shooting.
So the free throw shooting stat that I wanted to point out was this one: Bagley, Carter, Delorier, and Bolden, our big men. Our 4 big men who everyone seems to agree are, is the best front line in college basketball. They combined to shoot 2 free throws in the entire game. That's an absolutely crazy stat that our big men shot a total of 2 free throws in the entire game. The refs swallowed their whistles. They let BC push us around a lot, and that's fine if we learn how to push back, and we didn't push back. We didn't push back at all. Donald, I want to come to you, and I'm going to come to you with a question, and I'm going to give you some stats, and I want you to tell me what you think about these stats. So I was looking at what we did in the second half in terms of offense. In the second half, Marvin Bagley took a total of 4 shots. 3 of them were 3-pointers. He took 1 2-point shot. It was a shot he took in the lane. Wendell Carter took 2 shots in the entire second half. Javin Delorier took 1 shot. Marques Bolden, 0. So Bagley 4, Carter 2, that's a total of 6. Delorier 1, that's 7. Bolden 0. So our big men, a total of 7 shots in the half. And by the way, 3 of those are 3-pointers taken by Marvin Bagley. Grayson Allen took 11 shots. Trevon Duval took 7 shots. Gary Trent took 7 shots. Trevon Duval had as many shots in the second half as all of our big men combined. Donald, was this a case of Duke taking what BC gave them and failing at it? Or was this a case of Duke panicking? Or was this a case of Duke just really executing poorly and deciding we're going to shoot from the outside and we don't care about going inside?
I think we abandoned, what has worked so well for us this year. And I think in part it's because of how well BC shot from beyond the 3. Hats off to them. We were 8 for 30 from 3-point range, and BC was 15 for 26. That's, if you think about the plus minus, that's plus 21 points for BC right there. That's, if you're looking at the rest of the stats, you can nitpick on some of these other stats. That's your ball game right there. But what I didn't get the sense of, I didn't think we were panicking out there. I think we were just making abandoning the game that has gotten us to this point so far, and that is, getting the ball inside to our big men. We took a lot of threes, we took a lot of long jumpers, we settled, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that Grayson Allen has taken a lot of shots, that Gary Trent's taken a lot of shots, but I feel like the opportunities that were presenting themselves, they weren't the best shots that we had on those possessions. One thing I want to talk about, if you're looking at the stats, we had 10 steals. We outscored them in the paint 46-24. That's with the second half. We beat them in points off of turnovers. We beat them in second chance points. We beat them in fast break points, and our bench outscored theirs. If you look at this stat line, if you look at this box score, you're probably thinking, how the hell did Duke lose this game? And it's weird because I think just the momentum that Boston College had from shooting the lights out basically the entire game is really what carried them. Kai Bowman, Jerome Robinson, and Jordan Chapman made 26 of their 31 field goals. They're the only players in double figures for BC, and they literally seemed like they were hitting everything. Whenever we would creep back into the game or take the lead, one of those guys would make a couple shots and the lead was gone, or the momentum was gone. It's really interesting how in this first half, we were hanging with them despite the shooting. In the second half, I thought we were doing just that, but somehow in the end, it just didn't work out. And I think that's probably credit to how those three guys played. They played out of their minds together. If one of them has an off game, BC loses this ball game, and we're still undefeated. But you have to give them credit for how they played. I'll give you one final stat that I read this morning on ESPN about this game, and it was about our perimeter defense. And prior to this year, in 16 seasons, in 572 games, we had allowed one team to make more than 11 threes in a game. This year, Boston College became the third team to hit more than 11 threes in a game against us. And I wonder if that is what's really missing from our defense. I think our interior defense has been pretty good. And we've played a lot of teams that have good big men or play well inside, but our perimeter defense has just been kind of lacking. And we've allowed teams to stay in the game or take over the game because of the fact that they can hit from three. And so I think that's kind of where, in my opinion, that's where we faltered. When they started hitting threes, we tried to match fire with fire, and we got burned.
I'm so glad you brought up that stat by John Gassaway about how rare it is for Duke to give up 11 or more three-point baskets in a game. He was actually wrong. Because I'm going to tell you guys what I did today. I went back through the Go Duke database and I looked every single game. Now you can obviously scroll through them pretty quickly. They'll do entire seasons, so it's not like I spent hours on this. I looked at every single game Duke has played to find the last time a team hit 15 three-pointers against us. And I'm scrolling back. And I'm also looking for teams where they get, more than 11, more than 12, because it's really unusual. I mean, last year, the entire season, there wasn't a single team that hit 10 three-pointers against Duke. Not a single one. And as John Gassaway and as Donald Wine just pointed out, this year we've already had Elan hit 14, Portland State hit 12, San Diego State had 10, and BC had 15 threes. So I'm going back and I'm looking for teams that come close to that. On November 14th of 2015, 2 seasons ago, Bryant hit 13 threes. On February 25th of 2015, Virginia Tech in that overtime game. You guys remember the Virginia Tech overtime game in 2015?
Sure do.
Yeah. Virginia Tech hit 12 threes. So I'm looking, and I'm going back year after year. And most years, no one's even hitting 10. I go back, I get to 1997 and Arizona. We played Arizona and we gave up 10 threes. It was the first time in like 5 years we'd given up 10 threes in a game that year. And I keep going back, and finally I found the game. I found the last time Duke gave up 15 three-pointers in one game. March 10th of 1995. Gentlemen, the 1995 season, absolutely legendary. It's the worst season Duke has had since Coach K established himself at Duke. It's the year he had his bad back and he was out for most of the year. Duke went 13-18, 2-14 in the ACC. And the final game of that season, the ACC tournament game that Duke played against Wake Forest, Wake hit 16 three-pointers in that game to end Duke's season. Randolph Childress was 8 for 12, all by himself on three-pointers. That's the last time that Duke gave up this many three-pointers in a game. I'm going to repeat that for folks who didn't get it first time. March 10th of 1995. Sam, were you alive then? You were alive then, right?
I was alive. I was in first grade. So it's been a while. I mean, I don't know how many people you're going to impress with that stat, but you can put it to what does the 2017 Duke team have in common with the 1995 Duke team that or 2018 with 1995 that nobody in between has in common with them? And it might take people a minute to find that connection, because I even though I don't remember watching that team, I know from reading about it that season was just all kinds of wrong, and that in the Duke teams of my memory, the worst Duke seasons that we've had, probably the worst one that I vividly remember is 2007, when Duke was a 6 seed and lost to VCU in the tournament, and that's nowhere near as bad as 95 was.
So the big question at this point, gentlemen, is this BC game an outlier, or is it a harbinger of the way that Duke may be in trouble this year? The theory that ESPN has, and this, all this started from Donald started this conversation about three-pointers because he saw this ESPN article, this ESPN tweet, but also the article that goes with it about the fact that Duke is allowing three-pointers this year at a rate we never have before. I mean, as I was mentioning earlier, BC hit 15, which is like a crazy, crazy number, but Elon had 14, Portland State had 12, San Diego had 10. I mean, Duke is giving up threes in a way we haven't in the past. 3 is worth more than 2. Is this the formula for beating Duke? And was this BC game an aberration? Or Sam, I'll ask you, do you think we may see a lot more of this?
I'll give you the optimistic take, which is that certainly teams will try. I think that the lack of practice time that the team has probably had for this first month plus of the season has contributed to them not really being able to make adjustments, right? We haven't seen the team. I mean, other than the wrinkles with the zone defense, we haven't seen interesting different offensive sets. We haven't really seen the team change yet. With all the time they have off now for finals and then around the Christmas break, they are going to have opportunities to change that. And I think that I'm sure that the coaching staff sees as much about the 3-point defense as we do, if not certainly a lot more. I think that will be a focus as they look forward, and that the defense will improve specifically on the 3-point line, because Duke has been actually in years past pretty good at that. And even if they don't shore up everything about the defense, even if they don't establish a good defensive rhythm all over the court, I do think that we're going to see them improve from the 3-point line, because it's an easy thing to kind of emphasize. So I will say teams will try it. Teams will make a lot of threes against us, probably, but we won't see another team make 15, and at least this team will get better at defending it. So it'll, maybe teams will make 7 or 8 threes against us, but it's because it's their only game plan and they don't have an inside presence.
Donald, I will give you the final word on the frustrating loss to BC. Talk to me a little bit more. What do you think about the perimeter defense? Is this the biggest problem we have?
I think it is, and the real reason is, but it's also something that can be easily fixed. We have, at this point, we'll have 7.
I'll tell Coach. You're going to give Coach K. Listen up. Donald's got an easy for you.
Well, we have 7 days before the next game, which is Evansville, and then we'll have after that a 10-day break before we get into ACC season again. against Florida State. But what I think is I won't say an easy fix. I'll say a fix is, pressuring the guards more on the perimeter and not allowing these 3-point shots. In previous years, when we do that, we did that very well. But our drawback is that we weren't good at stopping dribble penetration and stopping in our guys on the inside in the paint. This year, I think that's our strength, is that we can stop dribble penetration. We have a lot of guys in the post that can wrap up anything inside, and our interior defense has been pretty good so far this year. And especially since we can throw all these guys at big men that they won't get rest. So I think a point of emphasis would be to get out more on the guards and pressure them a little bit more. The drawback is that you will give up some dribble drive penetration, but I think that plays right into the heart of the bread and butter of our defense. And I think when we do that, we may see a lot more, especially in previous years. In previous years, we were able to shoot threes very well, and so teams would try to match us, and they just couldn't do it. Now it seems like it's kind of reverse. Yesterday on Saturday, they hit 15 threes, and normally that's something that we would do. We can hit 14, 15 threes in previous years, no problem. This year, there's going to be more of a stretch. And so I think that we can, if we can get more people to be inside the post, we're going to win that battle every single time in the paint. I think our guys are more than capable of doing that. And I think Coach K is probably working on the perimeter defense to kind of slow down these 3-point shots, because that's what's keeping these guys in ball games.
Okay, folks, a special treat for you now. Sam sat down just a short time ago with the brand new beat writer for the News and Observer, covering all Duke sports, but mostly covering Duke basketball. Jonathan Alexander is his name. And we want to give you now Sam's conversation with Jonathan Alexander, the guy covering Duke basketball.
All right. We are joined now by Jonathan Alexander. He is the, I would still say, brand new beat reporter for the News and Observer covering Duke athletics. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
All right. Thank you for joining us. Your first time here on the Duke Basketball Report podcast. How long have you been in the job now?
First of all, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I've been in the job since the beginning of basketball season, but officially it was December 1st. That was the official date. But I've been covering since the very beginning, since the blue and white game.
Okay. And where were you before you had this current role at the News and Observer? Were you covering sports elsewhere? Were you in the Triangle? Were you somewhere else?
Prior to covering Duke, I was covering recruiting for the News and Observer for about a year. And prior to that, for 3 years before that, I had been covering news, kind of town government, crime, and schools. So I've done a little bit of everything so far.
Were you trying to get on the sports beat when you were over on the news side, or this is just kind of what happened?
Yeah, I always wanted to get into sports. Ever since I started at the News and Observer, while I was doing the news beat, I was still freelancing for. It's kind of weird. I was freelancing, kind of getting kind of like a separate paycheck in sports than my regular job. So I was getting a little extra money doing stories on the side. So I've been doing sports stories since I started at the News and Observer, and that was always a goal of mine, to be a beat reporter, and I finally was able to kind of achieve that.
There you go. And covering, at least in our opinion, the most interesting program to be following around, right?
Definitely a very interesting program, high profile program. Definitely very interesting.
Are you from the Research Triangle area?
Originally, I am from Charlotte, North Carolina, but I went to school down here. I went to North Carolina Central University, and so that is in Durham. For those who don't know, and after I graduated school, got a job with the News and Observer, so I stayed in the area. I haven't left since college.
So you are
yeah.
so from your upbringing, I would say you're probably intimately familiar with ACC basketball even before you were on this job or on this beat.
Yes, very, very familiar with ACC basketball. Family members who, loved college basketball. So I watched college basketball. I never really took to a fan base because my dad never really took to a fan base. He went to North Carolina Central as well. So while I wasn't in the rivalry as far as picking a team, I watched it from the outside, and so I'm very familiar with the ACC basketball culture.
So if we asked you, say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, what are your general impressions of Duke basketball? What do you think about the program? What would you have said kind of before you were covering them? I guess first as a recruiting reporter and now as the main beat guy.
I guess I would probably say elite program, one of the best. When you think of top college basketball programs, you think of course, your blue bloods, and Duke is one of them. Duke, UNC, Kansas, Kentucky, they're among the best. So that's I always thought that they were one of the best college basketball programs in the country. So you can't have anything but respect for that and what Duke has been able to accomplish over the years.
And I guess now looking at the current team, so we've seen at this point in the season they've kind of finished up most of the non-conference schedule. Certainly, all the parts of it I think that looking ahead at the season looked the most interesting. Right, the games in Portland and then at Indiana, Michigan State. All those games are now kind of behind us. We have a good kind of sample of what we're going to see from this team this year. Is there anything so far that has particularly surprised you? I know that coming in, we expected to see a lot of Marvin Bagley. If you were covering recruiting, I'm sure that you had seen and written plenty about him. Was there anything about this team that you've seen so far that is surprising relative to expectations?
I am definitely surprised at how talented the freshmen are. I don't know that I expected Wendell Carter to be as good offensively as he can be. He gets fouled out a lot, so he doesn't get to showcase that all the time, or he gets in foul trouble a lot, so he doesn't get to showcase that all the time. But I think it surprised me how many weapons they had and how fast they were able to kind of translate that into success. I know they were picked number one, but oftentimes it takes a while for young teams to get adjusted, and it seemed that they had it clicking from the very start. But that's because they have some really talented freshmen who can score. I think they have all 5 of their starters average 12 or more points per game. So that was what really surprised me in particular about this Duke team.
And what about the kind of the up and down performance on defense? Did you see that happening? Do you think that did you see them playing as much zone and mixing up the defensive game plan kind of as much as they have?
I didn't see it, but I guess it doesn't really surprise me when you have young players who are coming in and probably playing man-to-man defense for the first times in their careers. I mean, typically in the past, great Duke defensive teams have had, multiple upperclassmen who could play that lockdown defense. And now you have a team that's full of freshmen who are just learning how to play man-to-man defense. So it's not surprising to me that they have struggled and they have been up and down. But I don't know that I initially expected them to be up and down. Definitely not, being that Duke has typically been a good defensive team. But it makes sense to me.
Do you think that the defense is going to be the focus of all the off time they have? I mean, they have a lot of time to practice now before they get into the meat of conference play. Do you think that the defensive rotation is the most pressing need for this team, or what else do you see them working on, and what do you think we're going to see improve as we get into January?
I definitely think defense is what they're going to focus on. I think it was either before the St. Francis game or before the South Dakota game. They had a day to practice and a day of travel, and they worked on defense, and that was a focus. And they only had a day to work on it. And they knew that they were struggling at that point. They knew that that's what they wanted to work on at that point. So I definitely feel that they'll probably be working on defense this break, and they definitely need it. And you can kind of see in the games, they have defensive breakdowns, miscommunication. When somebody sets a screen, two people will follow that man, and then there's a guy like wide open for seconds. And sometimes it takes the opposing team to find that player, but eventually they'll find that player. So they have a lot of communication breakdowns on that defense. So that's the most pressing issue. And Duke wants to be a good defensive team, so I don't see why they wouldn't work on defense and why they wouldn't focus. I mean, the offense is great. I don't know if they still rank number one according to Kim Palm in offensive efficiency, but I know prior to this last game they were ranked number one. So defense is definitely.
And if they're not number one now, that they're certainly going to hover around there for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd see all the different ways they can score. Do you think that the shooting's going to improve, or is this something they're just going to have to deal with for the rest of the season with not being able to rely on the outside shot the way that Duke teams in the past have been able to?
Well, I think they'll continue to pound the ball inside. They know that's where they get their success offensively. But it seems like Gary Trent Jr. right now is coming out of his shooting slump. The past two games he shot, I think 45% or better, and he's done good after struggling terribly. I think overall he's like 38% from the floor, but he's done pretty good these last two games. When Gary starts hitting that shot, he starts knocking them down. He gets confident, and you have Grayson Allen. Grayson Allen is going to one game hit a whole bunch of threes, and another game is going to be off, but it's going to be rare off days. And I think those are the only two outside shooters they really have. And but I think they're going to be focusing on pounding that ball inside and then kicking it out if they have to. So the shooting will get better. They'll have the ups and downs.
Do you think then that Trent is probably, among all the guys who are getting regular minutes, that Trent's the one whose role you could see increasing a lot as they get into conference play, just because he could come out of that slump? Or is there somebody else you think who has more untapped potential? I mean, the team is mostly young guys. Is there somebody who you think has a lot to contribute this season specifically that we haven't seen yet?
Well, Gary, I do think that once he comes out of that, if he continues to stay high, he could be a huge contributing factor for Duke. As you've seen, I'm sure y'all have watched every game. He's in almost every game, he's knocked down a huge shot to help if they were down, to help win. He even knocked down some shots against Boston College that I thought were going to give Duke the win. But he knocked down a shot against Michigan State. I think he hit free throws against Texas and Florida. He knocked down some free throws, or it was a layup against Texas. But he's a big time performer. I think his role will stay what it is. But I think somebody like Wendell Carter, having him in the game with Marvin Bagley is so crucial to Duke, and he has a tendency to foul out. And if they could just keep him out of foul trouble, having him and Marvin Bagley, two 6'10" guys who are very skilled under the basket, having two guys down there would just, Duke could dominate if they could just keep both of them in the game.
Pivoting a little bit to Bagley and maybe Carter to a lesser extent, did you think that Marvin Bagley was going to be this productive this quickly? I don't know how much you got to see him in high school. I know that he was out west, but I'm sure that he played here plenty as a high school student, just in like in AAU events and stuff like that. Did you see his emergence being so quick and him being so dominant?
Well, I was only on the recruiting beat for a year, so in that year that I was on it, I didn't see him play in person. But I did see him play on TV a couple of times, and one was in the Drew League, and the other was his high school. I think the playoffs and. For Sierra Canyon, and he was good. But I think But I didn't know he'd be dominating college basketball players. I don't know that I expected it. I knew he was number one when he reclassified, so I know he was going to be one of the best. But when he gets down in that post, he's nobody can really stop him when he gets close. So I did not see that. I don't know that anybody really expected him to be this good.
Is there a part of his game that you think is like most impressive for somebody who's so young and also still adjusting to college basketball?
I mean, his ability to get off the floor. He'll miss a shot and then he'll get up so quick and put it back in. I don't think I've ever seen anybody be able to do that. He can get off the floor twice before somebody jumps back down. Just his ability to grab offensive rebounds and put the ball in when he gets down close is what separates him from other people.
And then kind of pulling back a little bit, talking sort of more about the program in general, is there anything about being around the Duke program so much now that surprises you from or that you didn't expect from, I mean, like you said, you've been in the Triangle for a while. You grew up in North Carolina. You're certainly familiar with ACC basketball and all these different programs. Is there anything about being around the Duke players or the Duke coaches? I mean, seeing that whole coaching staff all the time, is there anything about them that surprises you or that kind of changes your perception of how they operate or interact with you or with fans?
Not too much, because I've been around the program some with recruiting. I guess one thing that I guess did surprise me was that Coach K is kind of funny. He's kind of a funny guy. He jokes often, except when they're losing.
Which they have done now once, right?
Yeah. So he didn't joke too much last game, but I guess really I really wasn't surprised by anything, because I've been around the program when I was covering recruiting. I go to Duke games, NC State games, UNC games, so I kind of knew how it operated. I kind of knew how it was, but I didn't really. I guess I never really paid attention to Coach K's humor, and he's a funny guy.
Do you have a good example from I don't know, from a press conference or anything like that?
Oh, okay. So it was one press conference. I think it was like the blue and white game, or maybe it was before that. And so I think someone had asked a question about them being voted number one in the coaches poll, and Coach K was saying something along the lines of, those things don't really mean anything in the preseason because, teams really haven't seen you play. And then he used some kind of analogy. Coach K is good with the analogies. He reminds, him and Lavelle Moten in North Carolina Central are the best with analogies. But he used some kind of analogy that, he said that just would be like me having like a handsome contest of the people in this room and me judging you all. I mean, personality contest and me judging you all without even, meeting you all. And then he said, I know he was saying that maybe a couple of people in here are handsome. And I kind of jokingly pointed to myself. And then he looked at me and we hadn't even met yet. And he was like, yeah, you be up there. Yeah, you be in that top. I didn't expect him to say that, but that was kind of a funny thing.
If a 60-year-old man tells you that you're good looking, you gotta take it, right? He's successful.
Yeah, I was very flattered by it. So.
There you go.
Yeah, so that was funny.
Sounds good. I'll ask you one more, and then we'll kind of wrap up. Have you had any personal interaction with any of the current players and any guys in particular that are easy to talk to or that kind of give you interesting quotes, or is it mostly pretty generic?
Good quotes. Grayson Allen, he's been around, so he'll give you a good quote. All the guys that I've talked to really have good personalities. Trayvon Duval, Gary Trent Jr., Marvin Bagley. Those are the guys, and Grayson are the guys who I've talked to most. And all of them have good personalities. All of them are really good kids. I've been around kids who didn't really like to talk to the media, and you could tell, and you can't really tell with these guys. They either fake it really good or they're pretty good with the media.
I mean, it's probably hard to fake it when you're 18 years old.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And these guys are the best. They've been the best in the country, so they probably dealt with a lot of media. So that might be why they're good. And they're genuinely, I can tell by those particular guys, those particular freshmen, and Wendell Carter, I forgot to mention him. They seem like genuine, good guys. You can kind of tell when some people are. So all of them are interesting personalities. Grayson will probably give you the best quote. Nobody really jumps out at you. I know you guys are Duke fans, but the only athlete who probably used to give me some really good quotes was Kennedy Meeks last year for UNC. And but most kids don't really.
I think we can accept it, even if he wasn't our favorite player. Sure. I'd like to think that we're all basketball fans, in general, in addition to just being Duke fans, and the three of us certainly watch a lot of ACC basketball outside of watching just Duke games. So we, we're familiar with those guys, even if they're not our guys.
Definitely. I hear you on that.
That's I think that's all I had for you. Thank you again for joining us and kind of giving your impressions of the program. Excited to have you on the beat here and to follow your work. So, Jonathan Alexander, you're at the News and Observer. Folks, I guess, can pick up the hard copy of the paper if they live in the Triangle. They can read your work online. And you're on Twitter, right?
Yep, I'm on Twitter at JONM Alexander. Or you can just type in Jonathan M. Alexander in Twitter and find me.
All right.
But
all right.
Thank you very much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Excellent. Hopefully we'll talk to you again sometime, maybe towards the end of the season or next year. So once again, thanks to Jonathan Alexander from the News and Observer for joining us on this edition of the show. And we'll talk to you again sometime down the road.
Thanks a lot. Anytime.
Sam, great job on that interview. I know Jonathan's only been on the job for a short period of time, but it was a lot of fun to talk to him and hear his impressions. I adored him saying that the most surprising thing was Coach K's sense of humor. I think that's great to know. I mean, you get this impression when you watch games that Coach K is this incredibly stoic and serious and focused guy, and he has to be really focused during games, but it's kind of nice to hear that at the press conferences and sort of when he doesn't have to be with the camera shining on him, he's much more relaxed and having fun. And I think that to me, that was the thing I took away from the interview. Sam, let me ask you, I mean, you're the guy who did the interview. What was your favorite part of it?
I think that was it. I really wanted him to when he said that he grew up in North Carolina in Charlotte, I was very much hoping that he was going to have some ACC basketball story to tell. But I guess if his dad was an NC Central guy and he's an NC Central guy, it sounds like he was a neutral party to all the ACC partisanship that he probably grew up around. So I would say the one thing that he left me hanging on was that he didn't have a sort of a better childhood ACC basketball moment. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that the humor thing was good, and I also liked his impression of how kind of how easygoing the freshmen are when it comes to the media, because as he said, they are all talented guys who have been around the AAU circuit. They've probably dealt with the media, all of them, for a few years before coming to school, but just the way that they're all grounded and able to communicate with adults so often is really impressive to me, and something that I think I had picked up on myself from watching the games, but is not something you can necessarily tell unless you're seeing them really on a regular basis, the way that, say, a beat reporter would.
Donald, what about you? What was your takeaway from the interview?
Well, I like that he has a unique perspective on Duke and basically on the ACC. he is one of the rarities. He's a guy who grew up in North Carolina, that does not have a real big investment in any one of the Tobacco Road teams. He went to NC Central.
But, let me ask you, do you think if you were the News and Observer, could you possibly put an NC State or a North Carolina fan on the Blue Devil beat? Could you put a Duke fan on the Blue Devil beat? Like, I would be the wrong guy to cover Duke. I couldn't do it journalistically. I'm sure that it's the same for you guys.
I know that I know that a lot of the local media in around the Triangle are North Carolina people, and that I know that there's a lot of NC State alumni who are like the local sports media. We don't count, right? Because we're not sort of the traditional. We're not like on radio or writing newspaper columns or anything like that. But I think a lot of the folks are from around there because it does come out sometimes. And honestly, I think as long as you have kind of enough of the journalistic distance to separate yourself, then it probably makes you better because you have, and Jonathan has it, I would imagine, even though he doesn't have a team, an ACC team that he rooted for growing up, at least he has kind of the perspective on like how nuts the ACC basketball life is and how seriously so many people take it and how far back all their memories go, because we talk about Duke games. Like I talk about Duke games with you guys that I never saw and Duke teams and players that I never saw, and it seems so ingrained in me. Like I've always been an ACC basketball fan, so I always rooted for Duke and read about Duke, and so we can have conversations about like, Jason, like I can talk to you about the 1986 championship game, even though it happened before I was born. And Jonathan probably gets that because he's from North Carolina. And I think a lot of the other media in the area get it too, which makes it better because they have kind of that institutional memory of ACC basketball in addition to whatever team it is that they followed or school they went to.
Sam, you mentioned it really well when you said journalistic distance, and I think that can go both ways, right? You have, the beat writer before was Laura Keeley, friend of the podcast, was a Duke alum, I believe graduated with you, right? And
she's my year, and she was on the Chronicle sports page, I think, the whole time that we were in school.
Yeah, and if you did not know that about her, you would not think that she went to Duke when you're talking about her writing. She didn't write with a Homer perspective, if you will. She didn't write with a slant. And was not, a lot of people accuse people like Jay Billis and Jay Williams and Seth Davis of being homers for Duke. No one ever, gave that impression.
Who accuses Jay Billis of being a homer?
Oh, some people do.
No,
trust me. People who do not go to Duke.
Those people are silly.
They are silly, but that's the impression that they get. But with Laura, I never got the impression. Like I did not know until you informed us that she was a Duke alum, because she had that distance. And I think that's very, very important, especially when you're living in the rivalries, so to speak. I mean, he's right in the thick of everything. He writes for the Raleigh paper talking about Duke basketball and football. That's going to be a very delicate, and it's going to be read by UNC fans. Like, this is a very delicate balance that anyone in his position would have to do. And I appreciate the fact that he has a unique perspective in the sense that he doesn't really have a dog in a fight. He's a guy who grew up in the rivalry, but not inside the rivalry, if that makes sense.
So this edition of the DBR Podcast, once again, is brought to you by the fine fellows at Byrd Campbell, the Byrd Campbell law firm, and Tucker Byrd, one of the two Duke roommates who founded Byrd Campbell, sent us a note after the BC game, and I just want to share it with you people really quickly. He points out that this game, the game, should be a great learning experience, a great learning lesson for this young group in this positive reinforcement era where young athletes are taught, appropriately so, to affirm your opponent. It had to have been quite a shock for a gym full of full-throated adults to be screaming at the Duke basketball team, calling them overrated, cheering their misses, and flooding the floor when they lost the game. What the Duke guys will learn from this game, he says, is that the intense negative reaction is actually the ultimate sign of respect. Beat Duke and you've done something. Give BC credit. They played great. They deserve to win. and they deserve to lustily cheer Duke's defeat because those cheers only affirm Duke's prominence. So that's the message from Tucker Byrd of Byrd Campbell. And we remind you once again, if you have legal work in the states of Florida or Texas, reach out to them at byrdcampbell.com, BYRDCAMPBELL.com. Byrd Campbell means business. Gentlemen, we have spent a great deal of time talking about Duke's first loss this season to BC. And the deep, deep irony is that the BC loss came just a few days after probably Duke's most impressive offensive performance of the year. Not probably, certainly. Duke played the St. Francis Red Flash, and St. Francis came into this game saying that they were going to play their regular pace, play with tempo, and try and run up and down the floor. And they did that, but the problem for them was Duke ran a little bit faster than they did. The final score in this game, 124-67, 124 points for the Blue Devils. They scored 71 points in the first half, 1 point away from setting a Duke record for points in a half. It was a game full of huge, huge, huge heroes, most notably Marques Bolden. Marques Bolden had 17 points and 10 rebounds. Dude, he was dominant out there at times. It was like he was playing against me. What? Yeah.
Can I interject slightly?
Please. Yes.
I know I saw this comment on Twitter somewhere. Was Marques Bolden just padding his rebounding stats?
He may have been. He seemed to be missing a lot of chippies and then grabbing his own rebounds.
He missed a lot of easy shots, and it was like he was doing the Mikan drill or something.
Right.
Well, it's funny. He only went down as having missed 4 attempts, and I saw the stat line after the game, and I was like, "Y'all are outside of your mind," because he missed it seemed like he missed 20 shots and grabbed 10 rebounds, and kept throwing it back up there just to play with everybody else.
The funny thing is, you might look at it and you might go, he scored 17 points, but with all the easy shots he missed, he could have scored 25. But that's not the case. He scored 17 points, and that's exactly how many points he should have scored.
Exactly the number of points he had.
All those shots he missed, he just grabbed the ball back and put it back up again. It was
right. It's the rebound part of the double-double that is probably illegitimate.
But
I'm with it.
I mean, he struggled. He struggled so much. Come on,
that's fine.
Give him a break.
No, I do. I clown because I love. I don't know, something like that. He certainly showed a lot, and I was all prepared to be like, oh man, St. Francis game. Let's talk about this, and then BC happened. So, but yeah, a really impressive showing for Marques Bolden. I want to go farther down the bench and
Buckmire. Talk about Mike Buckmire.
And tell you that first
play of the game.
Mike Buckmire. Not only did he have an and one, but he did it going coast to coast, and that was awesome.
After Justin Robinson channeled his inner LeBron James and just annihilated a shot. Annihilated.
Friend of the podcast, Justin Robinson. I think the first Duke player of any kind that we had on the show. Is that right?
I think you're correct. Yes.
Current player, yes.
It was during that first season that we had him on when he had just signed his I don't know what exactly his agreement was.
Right.
Letter intent.
He had just committed to Duke. And I got to him at Top Golf San Antonio. He's from San Antonio. I got to him at Top Golf San Antonio before the Duke Sports Information Department could tell him you're not allowed to talk to the media.
Yeah. And anyway, so we had him on, and I'd like for us to take credit for his, let's call it his breakout performance against St. Francis. Not only did he have 5 points, not only did he have a 3-pointer made, he had one of the most awesome chase down blocks. And the chase down block, I don't know if I mentioned this on the last show because we've had a couple of them this year. Javin DeLaurier had a really fierce one.
Yeah.
That I think the chase down block is my favorite play in basketball because, I mean, it's awesome. Everyone gets excited about it, but also because with the right player, and Justin Robinson was not who I expected it to be, but DeLaurier, and then before him, Miles Plumlee, who was awesome at it at Duke. Because you can see it coming.
Yes.
And there's a moment of anticipation where the one opposing player has the ball on the fast break and is like, I am going to get a layup. And it happens to shorter guys because they can't necessarily dunk it confidently. Seeing the defender come out from behind them right before he's about to go jump, that anticipation is like my favorite thing to watch. And LeBron James is obviously like the king of that move, but Duke's had a couple of guys who can do it well. And Robinson, he cocked his hand back for that block. I mean, he was thinking about it and ready for it. He had the whole thing set. It couldn't have been teed up better for him. That was my play of the game, was that block, and then Buckmire going coast to coast with the and one.
The best part about those kind of blocks, is that you talked about the anticipation. The entire world can see that sort of block coming, except for the guy who has the ball. And you don't have time to tell him. You don't have time to send him an email or send him a text message or be like, yo, man, maybe you should pull back. There was no chance for that dude to know what's coming until it happens.
I actually think that those guys know it's coming. There's just literally nothing you can do about it. If you're 6'2" and not comfortable dunking, and you know that you're going to have to lay it off the backboard, and you sense that there's a guy who's 6'9" who's catching up to you, you're toast. Like, nothing good is going to happen to you.
There's no getting away from it. I'll tell you what I think the most significant thing that happened in that St. Francis game was Gary Trent Jr. shot well from the perimeter, which is something he hadn't been doing very much. And it continued against BC. But to me, I mean, Gary Trent Jr. was 4 of 6 from 3. I think that, and he was hitting them early in the game. Like, he came out and I think he hit his very first one, and I was like, finally, because Gary Trent Jr. had really been struggling from distance prior to that. To me, that was the thing that was the most important thing that happened in that St. Francis game, other than Mike Buckmire scoring 3 points.
The other exciting thing about that game, that I don't know if it resonates with you guys as much as it resonates with me, there was a point where Duke went up 40-15, which is a score I remember seeing in Cameron in 2009. Might have been 2010 against Maryland. It was 2009 against Maryland when
60-20
Duke was when it was 60-20, but it was 40-15 earlier, like a few minutes before that. Duke just it was Grievous Vasquez's senior season, and being, as I have mentioned many times, being from Maryland and growing up a Duke fan, there is nothing that gave me more joy than seeing Duke just beat the crap out of Maryland. And so when that score flashed on the screen, I was like, good memories, good times, man.
The one thing I took away, or there's a couple things I took away from this game. One, we talked about how many rebounds we got. We almost got as many rebounds as St. Francis had points. We had 61 rebounds. That's got to be some sort of, or close to some sort of Duke record. But the one thing that I will point out again, and we talked about BC, from the 3-point line, against Boston College, we shot 8 for 30, and Boston College shot 15 for 26. Against St. Francis, it was almost the exact opposite. We shot 15 for 26, and St. Francis was 7 for 30. So that just tells you like what kind of momentum that gives a team, especially for us, because like we mentioned before, St. Francis had maybe 2 guys in their rotation that were over 6'8", and we had 5. And when they're sitting there, like, they can't come down with any rebounds. We were getting a lot of pressure on the ball, forcing them to take a lot of jumpers. And they were thinking that the one way they can keep in the game was by knocking down some threes, because we're not supposed to be a good 3-point shooting team. When we go 15 for 26, that's how you end up with a score of 124-67, because we just absolutely annihilated them in every facet of the game. But they were clearly outmatched. But it's weird how we went from that to the game against Boston College. It's almost like, did we leave some of those points in Cameron on Tuesday night instead of bringing them to Boston College on Saturday?
I'll go out on a limb and say that any game where Duke hits 15 3-pointers this season, they will win. Yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
I'm way out on that limb. In fact, I think any game where anyone hits 15 3-pointers, you would have a tough time finding a team that hit 15 3-pointers and lost. maybe, I mean, go back to the Loyola Marymount days. I'm taking us back in time a while when Paul Westhead was at Loyola Marymount, and they were scoring 120 points a game, doing nothing but shooting 3-pointers. Pretty much in the past decade or so, you hit 15 3-pointers, you're winning the game, as Boston College showed us and as Duke showed us a few days before that. All right, folks, we're about to wrap it up. Before we do, we have our Player of the Week and our parting shots. We'll start with Player of the Week. Donald, I will go to you first. Who is your Player of the Week? BC games, St. Francis games. That's our week. Who's your player?
You know what? I'm giving it to Justin Robinson because he had one of the illest blocks I've seen from a bench player in a long time. It got me out of my chair, almost made me tackle my TV set. Thankfully, I still have a TV set to watch all these games, but my energy was at an all-time high because of Justin Robinson. And for that and that alone, he is my Player of the Week.
I like it. Sam, what about you? Player of the Week.
The ugliest 3-point play you'll ever see, Mike Buckmire, my Player of the Week.
So I guess it falls to me to do a semi-serious one. I'm going to give it to Gary Trent Jr. No, I'm giving it to Gary Trent Jr.
That's fair.
That is a fair
one. He had a fabulous week. He hit 10 3-pointers on the week. With in a week where there was not a lot of great play from Duke's Duke's starters. I'd give it to Gary Trent Jr. and Javin DeLaurier would have been my runner-up. DeLaurier had a really, really good weekend. There is some talk that DeLaurier may be pushing to move his way into the starting lineup, but I don't know if we're quite there yet. But he played great as well. So, gentlemen, we move on now to parting shots. I will go to Sam first. Sam, what you got for me?
My parting shot comes in 2 parts. It's a statement and a question. The statement is Happy Hanukkah to those who celebrate. As soon as
Thank you very much. I'm celebrating.
Here, there you go. As soon as we're done here, I'll be lighting my candles here by myself, which I know sounds kind of sad, but that's okay. And then the second half of my parting shot is a question for Jason and also for Donald, but Jason in particular, because I know that this is one of his passions. Jason, will we be discussing The Last Jedi next week on the show?
I absolutely think we can. I see no reason why not. Next week,
all right,
is sort of a slow week for Duke basketball. And so we're going to be doing some sort of fun stuff. And I think talking about The Last Jedi would be a wonderful, I've already seen it, as you know. I saw a advanced screening of it. By the time folks get this podcast, my bet is a lot of other people will have seen it. I'm not going to go into a review now. We will discuss it next week. But you have reminded me, Sam, we should tell folks that next episode, our episode next week, will be the one where we are looking for people to suggest YouTube videos of old basketball highlights and stuff like that, mixtapes, whatever it may be, that Sam should watch. We're trying to educate Sam about the history of basketball. So please write to us at dbrpodcast@gmail.com, dbrpodcast@gmail.com, and let us know what we should show Sam and what we should have Sam react to from the history of basketball. Sam, what would you say, what era should people, when do we get to the point where you're really conscious of basketball so that people can go older than that?
I would say that the easiest break point is just in 2000. Although I do remember like Michael Jordan's Bulls, there's not a whole lot of other basketball I remember from the 90s. So if it's before 2000 and it doesn't feature Michael Jordan in like winning championships, then hit us with it. I reserve the right to point out that your basketball heroes weren't as cool as you think they were. Is that fair?
Oh, dude, I don't know. I'm having some trouble with that, but we will deal with that.
Talk about that next week.
We'll deal with that on the next podcast. Donald, it's your turn. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say that I think I mentioned last time, like I've watched the 1992 Elite Eight game, and I've watched some of the Final Four games from around that era. And listen, I know those dudes were awesome, but it doesn't exactly look like basketball does today, with some exceptions. Like Grant Hill's alley-oop against Kansas is pretty ferocious. I like that.
I think I'm going to force you to watch the entire first half of the Duke North Carolina 7-0 stall ball game.
Oh, gross.
just to make you endure that.
Do you have a reel-to-reel? Because if you do, that might make it easier to watch that game.
Jason, I'm already going to have to watch Duke play Virginia this year. Do you need to force that terror on me?
Every good player scouts their opponent, and that would be a good way to scout Virginia.
Oh, gross. I quit. We're done. Donald, what's your parting shot?
So I have two parting shots, two quick ones. The first one is I was able to work it out, and I will be going to the Quick Lane Bowl in Detroit on December 26th. It's going to be a great time. So the DBR podcast will be represented. Duke Gang was in my hometown, and I figured I could not miss that opportunity. So for those of you who are going to the game, looking forward to meeting some of you there. We will have a Coney Dog or 12, and it'll be a good time. But the second parting shot that I have, did you guys catch our boy Chris Collins, friend of the podcast, Chris Collins, and his Northwestern Wildcats the other night against Chicago State?
No, what happened?
Well, if we were talking about, big time blowouts, Northwestern in the first half had at halftime against Chicago State, little inner city rival, the score was 55-8, and it was not. I think the 8 is very, 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 generous considering that they probably it was
8,
55-8, and it was like I think it was 25-5, like 10 minutes into the game. And it ended up being 55-8 at halftime. They eventually went on to win 96-31. So you're talking about UVA scores. 31 is definitely a score that is visible on a lot of times on a University of Virginia box score. But I just wanted to point out, shout out to the Wildcats for probably the most egregious halftime score so far this year in college basketball, 55-8. Over what was an outmatched Chicago State. Also, fun fact, something I learned that game, Chicago State is in the WAC conference, the Western Athletic Conference, like the old conference that had Hawaii and Boise State and those type of teams, now has Chicago State. That tells you something about the realignment of college basketball has affected everyone, including the Chicago States of the world.
Chicago is not in the West.
It is in the Midwest, but the West, no.
No,
it was in the West.
It
was once, right? I mean,
we're going to show videos from the 1800s now.
If I don't see like James Naismith's Kansas teams.
It's the Midwest. They don't belong in the WAC. They belong in the mid-WAC.
There apparently is no mid-WAC. So
that University of Denver. The University of Denver plays, I think it's maybe lacrosse in the Big East. Did you know that?
Yes,
really?
I did know that. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, the East would have, for the East to include Denver, it has to be really big.
I was going to say, folks, I live in Denver. It is not the East. We do. There is an East Denver. It's like the city of Aurora, and Aurora also not the East. You got to go a long way before you get to the East from here.
Okay, gentlemen, it's time for my parting shot. I'm going to try and get through this. So a few days ago, my father died. He was 87 years old. He had no pain, no prolonged illness. He just went to sleep one night and didn't wake up the next morning, which is a pretty great way to go, if you ask me. Even at the age of 87, which was too young. And the reason I'm going to talk about him here and the reason I'm going to talk about him now is because he gave me an incredible gift. And that gift was a love of sports. But more than that, it was a love of the fellowship, the camaraderie, the shared emotion and passion that we all have for sports. I'm on this podcast right now because of my father. I grew up, as I've told people many times, in a UNC basketball home. It was an ACC basketball home, but primarily a UNC basketball home because my father went to UNC. His brother, my uncle, went to UNC. My grandfather, my dad's dad, went to UNC. I grew up doing nothing but watching Carolina basketball. And then I went to Duke, and I converted to the right shade of blue, but But my dad had already instilled in me a tremendous love of this game, a love of ACC basketball. I vividly, some of my earliest basketball memories are connected to my father at the 1976 Olympics, when Dean Smith went to avenge the United States loss in the 1972 Olympics. Dean Smith was the coach of the team, and my father, my grandfather, my uncle were friends with Dean Smith, and they went to the Montreal Olympics in 1976. And I vividly remember watching the games of the 1976 Olympics, looking in the stands, trying to see my dad, my uncle, and my grandfather. And so many Hawks games. My dad had Hawks season tickets for forever. And I remember watching John Drew and his bank shots, and then Dominique Wilkins and Tree Rollins, and the other greats on the Atlanta Hawks. And I got all of that from, and I watched those games with my father. Even much later in life, when he was getting up there and his mind was starting to go, he still every single night would watch basketball. That was like his big thing. Just about a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, he called me because he'd been watching a basketball game and he'd seen a player. He said he was watching a UNC game and a player from the other team had collapsed by their bench, and the guy was down, and the paramedics had to attend to him, and they took him to the hospital. And my dad was telling me about this whole scene. I didn't have the heart to break it to him that it was actually an NC State game. It wasn't a North Carolina game. He thought he was watching the Tar Heels. He was actually watching the Wolfpack. That's what happens when you get to be 87. But he was still watching up until the very end, even with his mind starting to go. So that's my parting shot. Thanks, Dad, for giving this gift to me. And I now I share it with my sons, and out there all over the place. I'm betting there's not a single person listening to this podcast who is a huge diehard Duke fan that doesn't say, yeah, I got some of my love of sports from my father. Guys, am I right?
Absolutely. I first of all, our condolences continue to be with you.
Thank you.
And your family. But yeah, I learned everything there is to know about sports from my dad. And I think it's fitting, honestly, like it's rubbed off on you, Jason, because we, as everyone out there knows, we kind of coordinate these things beforehand, these episodes. And I think it was Tuesday where you kind of got on and was like, hey guys, at this point we'd already found out about your father. And he was like, hey guys, are we going to do this podcast or what? And I think that's fitting, that for you to in a way that you're paying tribute to your dad this way. And we wanted to give you all the time that you needed. Same with your family. But again, our hearts are with you and your family. Our condolences, and your dad lives on through you, and he'll be very proud.
Thank you. That's really kind. And I want to stress, by the way, that it's not the reason I wanted to talk about him was because sports was this great bonding thing, and I feel like the three of us have bonded. We've been in each other's presence, a few times. We've gotten together, but I bonded with my father, and I was able to continue to have a relationship with him throughout his entire life because one of the reasons for it was sports. It was something that we shared. And that's just so important. Having things that we share bring us together as a society and as a people. And it's one of the things that makes sports so important to us. Even though it's not important, it really is important. That doesn't make any sense, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. So that's going to do it for us here on the DBR Podcast, episode number 97. Thanks for sticking with us throughout this entire podcast, as we mostly focused on kind of depressing stuff like Duke losing basketball games and me losing my dad. But we're laughing at the end. That's a good thing. That's the way it should be. We'll be back probably in about a week or so. Duke will play Evansville, and shortly after that game, we'll come on. We'll remember, folks, you need to tell us what you want to have Sam look at from the history of college basketball. Please write to us if you have any suggestions, if you have any comments. We can be reached at DBR Podcast, DBRPodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to leave a review, to rate us on iTunes or whatever, however other way you're listening to us. All those reviews, all those ratings, they help us out. They help us with search results, and they help our reputation in the podcast community, and we do so appreciate it so very, very much. For Sam and Donald, I am Jason Evans. It is now time for the Duke Band to take us home.